A lunge is a single leg squat. And similarly, just like there are many variations of a squat, there are also many variations of a lunge, but the same basic fundamental cues are the truth no matter what kind of variation that we're practicing. What we're looking for in a lunge is that our back knee is close to the ground, okay? And the reason why I'm starting with that cue is when your back knee is close to the ground and it's low, it's bent, okay? Our back leg is not straight, our back leg is bent. And what that's allowing us to do is to get into full range of motion of our single leg squat, AKA getting our glutes in the same height as our knees. Therefore, our thighs are parallel to the ground. Now, keeping that in mind, if we were to bring our back foot closer to our front leg and bring that back knee down, notice what happens to my shin on my front leg. It becomes a lot more diagonal, AKA there's more knee flexion, AKA it's more quad dominant. Remember, it's perfectly fine and natural for that knee to come past that toe. In many activities of our everyday life, like going up and down the stairs or lunging down to pick something up. So as long as you're not experiencing any pain or discomfort, it's perfectly natural, and we actually want to continue to push those outer ranges of motion. Now, similarly, if we bring our back leg forward to target more quads because more knee flexion, that diagonal line of our shin, if we bring our back knee backward, notice what happens to my shin. It remains more vertical in nature, and now we can lean forward, therefore lengthening our glutes, targeting our glutes, rather than our quads. Same exercise being a lunge, different focus being quad dominant or glute dominant. Similarly, there are different variations of lunges that are easier or more advanced than others. A reverse lunge is going to be probably the most accessible version of a lunge. A forward lunge is also a little bit more advanced of a lunge move, and we're typically not going to see a lot of forward lunges unless we're talking about walking lunges. A static lunge, for example, means that our feet don't move at all. We remain with our feet split and our body is just simply coming up and down. Basic form cues are going to apply to all lunge variations. First and foremost, our front heel remains planted on the ground, okay? So no matter if you're doing a reverse lunge or a forward lunge, it's really important to understand that your front heel remains planted because your front leg is the one that's working. Your front leg is what's carrying your body weight and the external load being your weights. So if we think about our body weight shifting forward into our front leg and our heel remaining planted, essentially this is just a single leg squat. I should be able to come down into a squat position, and I should, in theory, be able to stand up without using my back foot at all. I say this because a very big common mistake that I see when people are taking lunges is they put too much weight on their back leg, on their back knee, when your back knee is in a compromised position. And so they lean backwards almost as if to load that back knee, rather than shifting your weight forward to load that front leg completely. Another mistake that I see is having our back leg way too far away and not allowing any bend in our back leg knee. And the reason this matters is if we're not allowing any bend in that back knee, notice I can't get my hips as low as my front knee because my hip flexors are preventing me from being able to get down into that lunge. And I'm actually feeling more of a sensation in my hip flexor than I am my front leg. But if my front leg is supposed to be the one that's working, that's where the issue lies. So we want to take a step back, we want to bend our back knee, but our front leg is what's carrying all of that weight. And when our heel remains planted on the ground, when we stand up, we're pushing that ground away. You'll feel a lot more engagement in your front leg, whether that's your quads, whether that's your glutes, or whether that's just your front leg in general. Something to keep in mind, the bigger the step back, the more instability we're creating. So when we're taking that lunge, our feet are far enough away that our center of gravity is being challenged between our front leg and our back leg, and it's not able to necessarily focus on either front or back. So we're having a hard time stabilizing and balancing when we're supposed to be focused on the movement pattern and lifting to our true potential. On the flip side, if we take a smaller step back, we can have a little bit more control with that front leg. Sure, taking a smaller step back, like I said earlier, can help us target the quads more if we're shifting our weight forward, bringing that knee over our toes. But this can still be a traditional single leg squat or even a glute dominant squat by simply having our leg forward, closer to our front heel, and really just remaining a little bit more vertical. And now look at what happens. My shin remains a little bit more vertical. So the closer the feet, the more control you're going to have in being able to target and isolate your front leg, shifting your weight forward to that front leg. The further the step back, the less control you're going to have, the more you are going to have to be working on stabilizing and balancing and not necessarily focused on the lift. Now, looking at it from the front angle, when we're taking our step back, we don't necessarily have to bring our back leg in alignment with our front leg. In fact, similarly to having a wider stance and creating more instability that way, the closer your back foot to your front foot, look at how in line my feet are, we're also creating that instability because your foundation is super, super narrow. And when you have external weight, it's really making it hard to stabilize. So sometimes it can be helpful to remember you don't have to take a step back with your feet in a line. It's totally fine if you were to just take a step back with your feet hip distance in a normal stance. And so in doing so, you can have more stability because now your foundation is a little bit wider. So if you struggle with balance, stability, coordination, with range of motion with your lunge, a few things to keep in mind, like we just talked about. Is your back foot too far away? Can you bring your foot closer to have more control? Are you bending your front knee, but are you not bending your back knee, preventing you from getting into that range of motion? And are we paying attention to, are we taking a step back in alignment with our front leg, or are we allowing ourselves to make a wider foundation to have more stability? Let's go over a reverse lunge and a forward lunge with a few cues to remember for both of these variations that you can use in any lunge variation. With a reverse lunge, we want to make sure that our starting position is really what's setting us up for success, okay? So we are going to go ahead and we're going to take a step back, not necessarily too wide, not necessarily too narrow. We're just simply taking a step back, okay? Now, when I take that step back, naturally, my lower back is going to hyperflex because one of my feet came back, okay? So we want to make sure that we're bracing our core. And again, the first part of bracing your core is tucking that pelvis, okay? So tucking that pelvis forward, trying to even out that curvature in that lower back. Now we're just bracing our core, all right? We have that string from our belly button to our spine, and we're pulling from belly button to spine. We're sucking that in. Now we're just bracing that, okay? So from here, we're gonna take that lunge down. Our weight is shifted to our front leg, and our heel remains planted on the ground, all right? And now when we stand up, mind-muscle connection, really trying to make sure that your front leg, your front heel, is what's pushing off and coming out of that single leg squat. Now, a forward lunge, you'll notice we don't do a ton because it's pretty advanced and there's a lot of room for error. And so there's not really a huge risk to reward ratio there. And so this is why we don't see a lot of forward lunges, but we do have a forward lunge variation that we practice regularly, such as your walking lunges. And in your walking lunge, it's just a series of a bunch of forward lunges. You're just simply moving forward instead of staying stationary. But in a forward lunge, the reason it's so advanced is because when you take that step forward, a lot of times people have a hard time making sure that their heel remains planted. And so they take that step forward, but they forget to plant their heel. And as they're pushing off and taking a step backwards, we're not necessarily lifting using our full potential of our leg. We're really just targeting mostly our quads in a very unstable position. So when we take that step forward, we're still remembering our weight is shifted to our front leg. Our back knee drives down just to simply allow us to have full range of motion, okay? So mind-muscle connection, shift our body weight forward. We're tucking that pelvis forward. We're still bracing that core. And we're gonna take that step forward, heel remains planted, and then we push off on that front leg, okay? But we can't push off on that front leg if our heel is not on the ground and therefore lifting to our true potential. So really, walking lunges is just a series of forward lunges, but instead of pushing off to come back, you're just continuing that forward momentum. When we're lunging with external weight, it's important to understand where that weight should be placed so that we are lifting safely, reducing our risk of injury, and also increasing the efficacy of that lift. So if you'll notice, my weight is going to track along my front leg even though I'm about to do alternating reverse lunges, okay? So it doesn't matter which leg is in front or behind, my front leg is always gonna be the leg that's carrying the weight, the leg that's working, and therefore weight is gonna track along the front leg always, okay? So as I take a step back, you'll notice I'm almost leaning forward to ensure that that weight is tracking along my front leg, AKA it's really just my front shin, but you get the gist. So if we're taking a smaller step backwards in an effort to target our quads, you might see a form cue that says, hey, keep your upper body vertical, because if you'll notice, keeping your upper body vertical with a smaller step back, weight tracks along those leg lines, it forces a little bit more knee flexion and more quad dominance. Likewise, if you see a form cue that says keep your shin vertical, it doesn't matter if you take a big step back or a smaller step back. If our goal is to try to keep our shins vertical, that weight is going to track along that leg line. We are simply trying to stick those glutes back now, and that weight tracks along those leg lines. If you'll notice, I'm still in a pretty narrow position. Look at how close my back knee is to my front heel. I'm pretty narrow, but my shin remains vertical, and so therefore, I'm still targeting my glutes. So let's put it all together with a reverse lunge. Taking a step backward, bracing that core, tucking that pelvis forward, and we're making sure that weight tracks along that front leg line. Heel remains planted because our body weight is shifted forward, and we're pushing off on that heel. Remembering, no matter if it's a reverse lunge or a forward lunge, our feet don't necessarily have to be in alignment with each other. It's perfectly fine for them to remain hip distance from the lunge to the end position. And that's Lunges 101.